saving well over $4,000 a month if I was to live in Belize compared to Brisbane and have the same standard of life. Hey everyone, so I'm reading a book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, and he brings up a topic about the 3 most important decisions you need to make in your life: what you do, who you spend it with, and where you live. So today I'm going to explain how you might be able to choose a better place to live that will also save you a small fortune. If you haven't heard my story before, you might be shocked with the extreme lengths that I went to regarding point number 3. Поехали. Okay, so the first point I'm going to bring up is to discuss this quote from the book from Naval, and that is, do you want to leave your friends or be left behind? So what I think he's referring to is the idea that many people like to stay comfortable with their group of friends from high school or university. They stay in the town with them and enjoy their lives, and this is totally fine. But if you are also attempting to build, I don't know, a revolutionary AI-powered data scraping tool, then maybe you need to go and be in a place that will aid your development. Somewhere possibly like Silicon Valley or Austin, Texas. Look, I'm not saying you have to be in those places to make new tech, but it helps you get access to talent and money. So I get what he is saying, but I think that is more relevant to the tech startup world, because we're all not building this telepathic powered microchip or anything like that. Being in the investing world, I guess the center would be Wall Street in New York, or maybe London or Singapore. Well, I think with investing, it actually might be better to stay out of these places. The reason is because investing generally is about doing what everyone else isn't doing. So I think if you're surrounded by day traders in Wall Street, things can get a bit crazy and would be difficult for a long-term investor to think clearly. So New York is probably a bad place to be living if you want to be a long-term investor. And there's plenty of people we can look up to for examples here. Warren Buffett is very happy in Omaha, and that wasn't an issue for him. Guy Spear was in New York, but got out and now is based in boring old Zurich. Chuck Aker is in a small town called Middleburg, Virginia. Now, everyone has their reasons for living where they do. Long-term value investors probably would benefit from being in obscure places, away from business and financial districts. Now, this book is trying to explain that the location you are living in does influence your life. You are a product of your environment. But choosing where to live, well, it's a really difficult choice, because once you have decided to live somewhere and you have a family, it becomes almost impossible to move. So if you are like me and don't have a family yet, now is the perfect time to be thinking about the location you want to be long term. So now let me explain this idea of location arbitrage. Location arbitrage is the idea that you can get a very similar standard of life, but for dramatically different costs depending on the area you choose. Now, it could be as simple as living in a cheaper suburb in your city. Sure, the neighborhood isn't fancy or anything, but your money goes further. You have the money now for an extra room or 2 in the house, and maybe have a smaller mortgage repayment to make. Or it could be far more dramatic, like moving to a different state or halfway around the world to a totally different country. Now, I know that this isn't for everyone. Most people want to be close to their friends and family, but I can tell you now from experience that there are still people on the other side of the world. It's true, there are people in Ukraine, there are people in Portugal, there's people even in Bali. And even better, there are people similar to you in these places. And I guess leaving your friends is a bit scary, but making friends is something that feels kind of weird at first, but there are so many different ways to do that with sporting clubs and language classes, and even online with Bumble. It's not as hard as you think it might be. It is scary, I get it, and it isn't for everyone. But maybe, like me, you like making money. And I know a way to make $3,000, potentially $4,000 a month just by living in another country. Okay, so I want you to go to this website called numbeo.com. This website lets you compare living costs in 2 cities throughout the world. Now, the first 2 cities I want to compare here is Los Angeles in California and Bali. Now, it says you would need around $2,400 in Bali to maintain the same standard of life that you can have with $6,300 in Los Angeles. That's saving about $4,000 a month if you move to Bali, and your lifestyle wouldn't dramatically change. Now, the website goes into detail about how they came up with that number. So they talk about the difference in restaurants and like a beer here and cappuccinos and Coke and water. It's kind of like the CPI index essentially. So we even look here in the marketplace. So we got like milk and rice and chicken fillets and all the different stuff. you can see on the far right-hand side the difference in price. So a meal at an inexpensive restaurant in Los Angeles is going to cost you about 20 bucks. In Bali, it's just under $2. So the difference here is about 90%. And we go all the way down. So milk, obviously, okay, milk is an interesting one. Milk in Los Angeles is significantly cheaper than in Bali. So yeah, there we go. That's something that you'd have to pay for in Bali, I guess. But generally speaking, Bali is going to be significantly cheaper than Los Angeles. We've got transportation here, so we've got taxis and things like that. We've got basic utilities. Then we've got gyms and things like that. And we've even got childcare. So, you know, if you're thinking about having a family, or maybe you do have a family, this is what the cost would be, especially like international primary school for a one child. Wow, a big dramatic difference here. Clothing, rent per month. This isn't perfect because I know that in Bali you can get cheaper rent than this, and you can get obviously significantly more expensive rent than this, but the same in LA. So they're just trying to work out, like, on average what the price differences are for something of similar situation, of similar standard. So one bedroom in the city center, and that's, you know, roughly what it's going to be. The actual costs to buy an apartment per square meter, and then unfortunately the salaries are going to be significantly different because obviously you make a lot more money in LA. But if you can work remotely, well, then Bali becomes a very attractive option. Now I'm going to compare between Brisbane in Australia and Kiev because this is my situation. I was in Brisbane, now I'm in Kiev. Well, 6 or 7 years ago I was in Brisbane anyway. But I would need around, looks like about 3,000 Australian dollars to be in Kiev, but 6,800 Australian dollars to live in Brisbane, assuming the same standard of life. So I know that I wasn't spending anywhere near $6,800 a month in Brisbane. I was probably spending like maybe 2 or 3 or somewhere around that. So that similar standard of life in Brisbane, I probably can get away with maybe 1,500 in Kiev. But assuming the same things here, based on this comparison table here, it would save me around about $3,500 per month to live in Kiev, and that's probably not too far away. I definitely live a pretty good life here, and I would spend a lot more money if I was living in Australia. So that one's pretty interesting. But then let's go a little bit further here and talk about Brisbane versus Tbilisi. Tbilisi is the capital city of the Republic of Georgia, where I have lived before, and I often spend a lot of time over in Georgia. And it's even cheaper again. So we're talking now about 2,500 Australian dollars a month compared to 6,800 for Brisbane. So I'm saving well over $4,000 a month if I was to live in Tbilisi compared to Brisbane and have the same standard of life. That is location arbitrage. So if this idea of location arbitrage is interesting to you, I highly recommend going to that website, playing around with this yourself. Compare the city you're from to somewhere else in the world that may be interesting to you. Maybe you've been to Lisbon, Portugal before. Maybe you want to go to Hong Kong. Maybe you want to go to Cape Town. Do whatever you want, but play around and see whether you can find a really interesting location arbitrage for you. But like I said, this isn't that accurate. It is just a general guide, because I know that in Bali you can spend a lot less and you can spend a lot more, and same here in Kiev, but you know, it's a general guide here, and it's definitely a good place to start your research into this location arbitrage. So location arbitrage to me is actually really important, and it's one of the reasons why I left Australia. My money just goes so much further in Kiev or Tbilisi. But I guess you're thinking, why Kiev or Tbilisi? There are so many of these other places in the world and maybe better than Kiev and Tbilisi, and this is true. I guess I just like this part of the world. I still have more exploring to do, and will take my time to decide where I settle and start my family. Now, of course, I think there are some other factors that are important in making this difficult decision. So the first thing I consider is whether the place is going to be good for long-term thinking and has long-term thinking people. Where I am here in Kiev, there is a lot of short-mindedness and people spending their money, all of their money on fancy cars or trying to impress girls or anything like that. And I don't like that attitude, and I want to be around more people who are long-term thinking, because that suits me better. The next thing I have to consider is whether I'm going to feel safe in that place. Now, I don't like to follow the news. I like to go to the place first and get a feel for it myself. I didn't feel very comfortable in South Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg, but in Kiev, I feel very safe. And well, Ukraine actually has a bad reputation, but when you're actually here, it's very safe, and I feel there's no problems at all here. So it's about how I feel. The next thing I ask myself is, do I feel like the country is accepting of me? If I go to somewhere, I don't know, maybe in Asia or in Africa or somewhere like that, I'm really always going to be an outsider. I'm from a Western country. I don't understand the culture at all. Whereas in Europe, I'm going to be a little bit, it's a bit more likely that I'm going to fit into the culture a little bit more. Being from essentially a European descendant country, that does play a part in it as well. I also like to think about whether I could raise a family with like-minded people around me. If everyone is, I don't know, let's say I'm in Ibiza in Spain, on the island of Spain. Maybe everyone there is just wanting to party, and it's not really a family-friendly kind of place. Maybe I'd probably prefer somewhere that, you know, when I'm wanting to have a family and wanting to have kids, there's other people around me having kids as well. Number 5 is a really important one, and it's whether I can access the education and healthcare system that my family might need. Being a foreigner, maybe I actually don't get access to those same things as the locals do. So I need to check that before I settle down. Number 6, well, that's the climate. It is freezing cold in Ukraine, and I don't like that a lot. So maybe the climate's going to be an issue. And number 7 is nature. I don't want to live in an actual city. I prefer to live somewhere out in the forest somewhere where I can get some fresh air and not have traffic congestion around and all that type of stuff. So that's important to me. So I know there are a lot of factors, but if you are flexible, you should give it a try. Go live in another country and save some money. It's a fun experience, and I get a kick out of saving money and still living comfortably. And for those of you wanting to get started investing, well, you're going to need a good, reliable brokerage account that you can use in nearly all the countries of the world, especially if you're going to do this location arbitrage idea. And Interactive Brokers is the one for the location arbitrages of the world. There's a link in the description if you want to go check that out. And before we go, I want to say a big thank you to Thomas Clark, who has been with me here for a long time on the channel. You always have great comments. I appreciate the support. You are a legend. Thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I'll see you next time.